The fortress of Carthraxis hung, suspended in the crimson sky, a massive structure of black metal and ancient stone that had witnessed 3,000 years of dragon rule. Within its highest tower, a child screamed with rage, his small fists pounding against the reinforced walls hard enough to crack the stone. Prince Ithor was only 7 cycles old, but his strength already exceeded that of most adult humans. His scales, still soft and pearl-white with youth, shimmered with the promise of the deep emerald they would become. His eyes burned with golden fire as he unleashed another burst of flame at the training dummy, reducing it to ash in seconds. Again, Commander Vexral roared, his scarred face twisted with approval. "Show no mercy. Your enemies will show you none." The young prince attacked another dummy, tearing it apart with claws that would one day rend battleships. Around him, the other dragon younglings trained with equal ferocity, learning the arts of war that had kept their species at the apex of galactic power for millennia. The Draconian Empire stretched across 40 systems, built on conquest and maintained through strength. Every dragon child knew their purpose from hatching: to fight, to conquer, to dominate. Zaethor's father, Emperor Drakmir the Unyielding, watched from the observation platform high above. His massive form, covered in scales the color of deep forest night, radiated power and menace. Beside him stood General Kawaiarmoth, the Empire's greatest warrior, whose body bore the scars of 100 battles. "The boy shows promise," Kawaiarmoth said, his voice like grinding stone. "His rage burns hot. He will make a worthy weapon." "He must be more than worthy," the Emperor replied, smoke curling from his nostrils. "He must be unstoppable. The rebellion in the outer territories grows bolder. We crushed the insect species of Theta Prime, but now the mammals of the Coalition dare to resist us. My son must learn to break them without hesitation." Below, Vaethor continued his training, but something gnawed at the edge of his consciousness. Earlier that morning, he had passed through the servant quarters and seen something that confused him. A human female, one of the many enslaved beings who maintained the fortress, had been singing softly to her child. The melody had been strange, gentle, unlike anything in Draconian culture. The child had looked up at her with such trust, such peace, and she had stroked its hair with a tenderness that seemed almost magical. When Zaethor asked Commander Vexral about it, the old warrior had struck him across the face hard enough to draw blood. "Never question the weakness of lesser species. They are tools, nothing more. That softness is why they are slaves, and we are masters. Forget what you saw, or I will burn the memory from your mind with pain." But Zaethor could not forget. The image lingered like a persistent ember in his thoughts, even as he trained, even as he learned new ways to kill. 3 weeks later, the fortress received a new shipment of slaves from a conquered human colony. Vaethor watched from his chambers as they were herded into the processing area, chains rattling, many bearing wounds from the battle that had taken their world. Most of the dragons paid them no attention beyond what was necessary. Slaves came and went. It was the natural order. Among the new arrivals was a human male who seemed different from the others. Where most shuffled with broken spirits, this one walked with quiet dignity despite his chains. He was neither young nor old, perhaps 40 in human years, with dark hair touched with gray and eyes the color of Earth's old oceans. When a dragon guard struck him for moving too slowly, he absorbed the blow without crying out, then helped an elderly human woman who had fallen beside him. The processing overseer, a cruel dragon named Scarwyax who enjoyed his work far too much, examined the new slaves with cold calculation. "This one," he said, pointing to the dignified human with his talon. "He has too much pride. Send him to the punishment cells. A few days of agony will teach him proper submission." "Wait!" The voice came from above. Everyone looked up to see young Prince Aethor descending the stairs from the upper levels, an action that surprised everyone. Royalty never involved themselves in slave processing. "Your Highness!" Scarwyax bowed low, confused. "How may I serve?" Aethor did not fully understand why he spoke, only that something compelled him. That human. I require a personal servant, one intelligent enough to manage my chambers and attend to complex tasks. That one seems suitable. It was not an unusual request for a prince to have personal servants, but the timing was odd. Scarwyx hesitated, unwilling to give up his entertainment, but unable to refuse royalty. As you command, Your Highness. Though I should warn you, this one may harbor rebellious thoughts. His colony resisted for 3 full cycles before we broke them. Then, he has strength, Thor said coldly, channeling the voice of command he had heard from his father. Strength can be redirected. Broken tools are useless. See that he is cleaned, provided basic medical treatment, and sent to my quarters. As Thor walked away, he caught the human looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. Not gratitude, not hatred, but something like curiosity mixed with wary hope. It made the young prince uncomfortable in ways he did not understand. That evening, the human arrived at Thor's chambers. He had been cleaned and his wounds treated, though he still moved with the stiffness of recent injury. A metal collar around his neck bore the prince's personal seal, marking him as royal property. The human bowed, as was required, but his bow was controlled, measured, retaining some inherent dignity. What is your designation? Thor asked, trying to sound imperious as his tutors had taught him. I was called Marcus Webb, Your Highness. I served as a teacher on my world before it fell. You have no name now. You're property, but I will call you Marcus for convenience. Thor circled the human, studying him with a mix of childish curiosity and trained suspicion. You will maintain my quarters, manage my schedule, and attend to my needs. Any failure will result in punishment. Any disobedience will result in death. Is this understood? Yes, Your Highness. Why did you resist the Empire? Your species cannot hope to defeat us. Your resistance only brought more suffering to your people. Marcus was silent for a long moment, and Thor wondered if he would have to make an example of him immediately. Finally, the human spoke carefully. Because some things are worth suffering for, Your Highness. Freedom, dignity, the chance for our children to live as something other than property. It was a treasonous answer, one that should have earned immediate punishment. But something in the way Marcus said it, with quiet conviction rather than defiance, gave Thor pause. Those are foolish concepts. Strength determines order. We are strong, you are weak. This is natural law. Perhaps, Your Highness. Marcus bowed again. May I begin my duties? Over the following weeks, Marcus proved to be an exceptional servant. He managed Thor's chambers with quiet efficiency, anticipated needs before they were spoken, and maintained absolute discretion. Unlike the cowering slaves who flinched at every movement, Marcus moved through his tasks with calm competence. He never tried to curry favor or offer false praise, but neither did he show sullen resentment. He simply existed as a steady, reliable presence. Thor found himself watching the human with growing fascination. During training sessions, when a young prince returned bloodied and exhausted from particularly brutal exercises, Marcus would have water ready at precisely the right temperature and would prepare the bathing chamber without being asked. He never offered sympathy, which Thor had been taught to despise as weakness, but there was something in his efficient care that felt almost like concern. One evening, after a day of particularly harsh combat training, where Thor had been forced to fight an opponent twice his age, the young prince limped back to his chambers with cracked scales and burned flesh. The pain was intense, but showing weakness was forbidden. He collapsed onto his resting platform, hissing through clenched teeth. Marcus appeared moments later with medical supplies. May I tend to your wounds, Your Highness? I require no assistance. Pain builds strength. Yes, Your Highness. Though infection builds nothing but fever and potential death, your father would be displeased if his heir fell to preventable illness. It was cleverly said, giving Thor a reason to accept help without admitting to weakness. The young prince nodded curtly, and Marcus approached with careful, practiced movements. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the wounds and applied healing salve stolen from a medical bay. where dragon healers worked with rough efficiency, treating injury as a shameful inconvenience. Marcus worked with something approaching reverence for the body he tended. "You were a teacher," Thor said suddenly. "What did you teach?" "History and literature, Your Highness. The stories of my people, the lessons of the past." "Why waste time on stories? The past is dead. Only the present matters, and the future we take by force." Marcus's hands paused briefly in their work, then continued. "The past teaches us who we are, Your Highness. Without it, we are simply creatures reacting to impulse, making the same mistakes endlessly. My people do not make mistakes. We conquer. We endure. We have ruled for 3,000 years. Then you have 3,000 years of wisdom to draw from," Marcus said diplomatically. "Surely your ancestors learned something valuable in all that time." Thor considered this. His education focused entirely on warfare, tactics, and the exercise of power. History was taught only as a list of conquests, a record of victories to be proud of. But Marcus spoke of it differently, as if the past held secrets beyond simple triumph. "Tell me a story," the prince commanded impulsively. "One from your human history." Marcus finished bandaging the last wound before responding. "Which kind of story would you like, Your Highness?" "One about strength, about a great warrior." Marcus thought for a moment, then began. "There was once a human warrior named Achilles, the greatest fighter of his age. He was nearly invincible in battle, and his rage was legendary. But his story is not remembered simply for his strength." Marcus's voice took on the cadence of the trained storyteller, and despite himself, Thor found himself listening intently. Achilles had a friend named Patroclus, whom he loved dearly. When Patroclus was killed in battle, Achilles' grief transformed him. He fought with even greater fury, killing the hero who had slain his friend. But in his grief, he also learned something about the cost of constant war. "What lesson?" Thor asked, genuinely curious. "That even the strongest warrior is made stronger by those he loves. And that rage, without purpose beyond destruction, ultimately destroys the one who carries it." It was a subversive story, one that contradicted everything Thor had been taught. Yet it resonated with something deep in his young mind, the same confusion he had felt watching the human mother with her child. "Dragons do not love," he said, but his voice carried uncertainty. "We bond for strategic purposes. We produce heirs, but love is weakness. Perhaps, Your Highness." Marcus bowed and began cleaning up the medical supplies. "Though I wonder if a species that calls love weakness has truly understood strength." The conversation troubled Thor late into the night. He was being shaped into a weapon, a tool of empire, but Marcus's words suggested there might be something beyond that, something his tutors never mentioned. It was a dangerous thought, possibly a treasonous one. Yet the young prince could not shake the feeling that the human slave saw something in the universe that the mighty dragons had somehow missed. The seasons turned, and Thor grew larger, his scales darkening from pearl to jade, his strength increasing with each passing moon. His training intensified under Commander Vexrel, who seemed determined to forge the young prince into the perfect instrument of war. Each day brought new lessons in destruction. How to melt hull plating with precision flame bursts, how to tear through reinforced armor with optimally angled strikes, how to identify the weakest points in various species' anatomies for maximum lethality. The other young dragons competed viciously for ranking, often leaving training sessions with serious injuries. Prince Thor consistently placed in the top tier, his natural aggression combined with tactical thinking making him formidable. Yet increasingly, he found the victories hollow. When he returned to his chambers after particularly brutal sessions, often having injured or humiliated another youngling, a strange feeling gnawed at him. The other dragons celebrated their dominance with boasts and laughter. Thor felt only emptiness. Marcus was always there, a quiet constant in the chaos. He never commented on the blood or the torn scales, never asked about the training. He simply prepared what was needed, maintained the space, and occasionally, when Zathor was receptive, told stories. Stories of humans and their strange history, their peculiar values, their incomprehensible emphasis on cooperation over domination. One evening, after Zathor had been forced to execute a captured rebel as part of his training, the young prince sat in silence for hours. The rebel had been a human, a fighter from the coalition who had killed 3 dragon soldiers before capture. Commander Vexral had explained that learning to kill without hesitation was essential, that mercy was a fatal weakness. Zathor had incinerated the prisoner with dragon fire, as commanded. But the human's last words echoed strangely. You're just a child. They've made you into a monster, but you don't have to stay one. Why do your people resist? Asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. Marcus was organizing the prince's study materials, pretending not to notice his master's troubled mood. The human paused in his work. Your Highness, the Empire is inevitable. We control 40 systems. Our military is unmatched. Every species that has resisted has fallen. Yet humans continue to fight, to die, for a war they cannot win. It is illogical. Marcus set down the data tablets he had been organizing and approached carefully. May I speak freely, Your Highness? It was a dangerous question. Free speech from slaves was not typically tolerated. But Zathor found himself nodding. We resist because the alternative is to accept that we are nothing, Marcus said quietly. Your empire sees us as tools, as property, as resources to be exploited. If we accept that definition, we lose what makes us human. We resist not because we believe we will win, but because the act of resistance itself proves we are more than what you say we are. You are insects fighting a storm. Perhaps, but insects have their own dignity, Your Highness. Even the smallest creature struggles for survival, fights for its place in the universe. Would you respect us more if we simply surrendered, if we accepted chains without question? Zathor considered this. In truth, he would not. The dragons respected strength in all its forms. An enemy who fought well earned acknowledgement, even in defeat. Total submission, while practically convenient, carried a taint of contempt. The prisoner I killed today said I was a monster. Were his words untrue? The question was shockingly direct. Any other slave would have died for such impertinence. But Zathor found he wanted the honest answer more than he wanted to enforce respect. I killed him because it was commanded, because it is my duty. Then the question is not whether you are a monster, Your Highness, but whether you will always be defined by what others command you to do. Marcus returned to his work, leaving the prince to contemplate words that would have been treason if spoken by anyone else. Sleep eluded Zathor that night. He lay on his resting platform, staring at the fortress ceiling, feeling the weight of expectations pressing down like planetary gravity. His entire existence had been planned before his hatching. Warrior, conqueror, emperor. There was no room for doubt, no space for questions. Yet doubt had taken root in his mind like a stubborn weed, growing despite his best efforts to tear it out. The next morning, during weapons training, Zathor faced off against Kawaiarval, another young dragon of noble birth who particularly enjoyed inflicting pain. They were practicing with traditional combat blades, learning techniques that would one day tear through enemy ranks. Kawaiarval fought with vicious enthusiasm, his attacks carrying more force than necessary for training. When he managed to score a deep cut across Zathor's shoulder, he laughed with cruel delight. The mighty prince bleeds like a common hatchling. Perhaps you spend too much time with your human pet, absorbing its weakness. The insult to Marcus sparked something hot and immediate in Zathor's chest. He launched a counterattack of such ferocity that Kawaiarval barely managed to block. Blow after blow rained down until the other dragon was forced to his knees, blade knocked aside. Zathor's blade hovered at Kawaiarval's throat, and in that moment he could have killed his opponent. Should have, according to dragon custom, to establish dominance completely. But he lowered his blade instead. Yield, Zathor commanded coldly. Kawaiarval, confused and humiliated, yielded. The watching dragons muttered among themselves. Mercy shown in combat was unusual, potentially weak. Commander Vexral approached with a dark expression. Why did you not finish him, Prince? He would have killed you without hesitation. He yielded. The combat was decided. Further violence would serve no purpose. Violence always serves purpose, the commander roared. It teaches fear. It establishes order. Your hesitation will be seen as weakness. Then, they will learn differently when I prove my strength through other means. Thor met the commander's gaze without flinching, a small act of defiance that shocked the older dragon. I am not finished with today's training. Send me another opponent. The incident reached Emperor Drakmir's ears within the hour. That evening, Thor was summoned to his father's throne room, a vast chamber lined with trophies from conquered worlds. The Emperor sat upon a throne of fused weapons, taken from defeated enemies, a monument to endless victory. You showed mercy today, the Emperor said, his voice echoing through the chamber. It was not a question. I defeated my opponent. The goal was achieved. The goal was to learn killing, not merely defeating. Killing. Smoke curled from the Emperor's nostrils, a sign of rising anger. I have received concerning reports about you, my son. You spend excessive time with your human slave. You ask unusual questions. You show hesitation where you should show ruthlessness. This troubles me. Thor felt fear, as any sensible creature would before one of the Empire's most dangerous beings. But he also felt something else, a strange clarity, a sense of standing at a crossroads. I am learning, Father, as you commanded. Learning what? To be weak? To doubt? To think? The words came out before Thor could stop them. Surely a ruler must do more than simply destroy, must understand his enemies, anticipate their strategies. The Emperor rose from his throne, his massive form radiating menace. I understand everything necessary about our enemies. They are inferior, and they will submit or die. This understanding has maintained our empire for 3,000 years. What could a human slave possibly teach you that I cannot? Different perspectives, Father. Sun Tzu, an ancient human strategist, wrote that to know your enemy is to achieve victory. How can I truly know them if I only learn to kill them? Quoting a human strategist to the Dragon Emperor was either brilliance or suicide. Drakmir stared at his son for a long, tense moment. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. You are bold, I will grant you that. Perhaps there is cunning in your thinking. Very well, continue your studies, observe your pet human. But remember this, Thor, knowledge without the will to act is useless. You may learn from your slave, but you will still kill when I command it. And soon, I will test whether your education has made you stronger or merely confused. Dismissed, Thor returned to his chambers to find Marcus waiting with medical supplies for the shoulder wound. As the human cleaned and dressed the injury, Thor spoke quietly. My father knows about our conversations. He believes you may be teaching me weakness. Marcus's hands paused briefly, then continued their work. Am I, Your Highness? I do not know. I only know that when I speak with you, the world seems more complex than my tutors describe. There are questions where before I saw only commands. Questions are not weakness, Your Highness. They are the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom? Thor laughed bitterly. My people value strength, not wisdom. Perhaps they should value both. Marcus finished bandaging the wound. The strongest fortress falls if its foundations are built on sand. Strength without understanding is merely violence. Eventually, it collapses under its own weight. Are you saying the Empire will fall? I am saying that all things change, Your Highness. The question is whether we change with them or are crushed by our refusal to adapt. That night, Thor dreamed of flying through stars, vast and free, with no commanders ordering his path, no expectations defining his purpose. He dreamed of worlds where strength and kindness were not opposites, where power could be used for something beyond mere domination. When he woke, the dream faded but left behind a strange ache, a longing for something he could not name. The following weeks brought new challenges. Zathor continued his brutal training while secretly reading the human texts Marcus provided: philosophy, history, literature. He learned about concepts like justice, compassion, sacrifice. He read about leaders who were remembered not for their conquests, but for their wisdom and mercy. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. During one session, Zathor was assigned to interrogate a captured Coalition spy, another human who had been caught gathering intelligence on Dragon Fleet movements. The spy was defiant despite obvious torture, his body broken, but his spirit apparently intact. Zathor's instructors expected him to extract information through escalating pain. Instead, Zathor dismissed the guards and sat across from the prisoner. "You are dying," he said simply. "Your injuries are too severe. Medical intervention might save you, but it will not be provided. You have perhaps 2 of your days remaining." The spy looked at him with hateful eyes. "Then get over with dragon spawn. I offer you a bargain. Tell me what you know, and I will ensure your death is quick and painless rather than prolonged. I will also pass a message to the Coalition on your behalf. Anything you wish your people to know." "Why would you do that?" "Because I believe you will die anyway, with or without telling me anything. But you can choose whether that death has meaning. Your people will know your final words. They will know you faced death with dignity." It was a manipulation, certainly, but one that acknowledged the spy as a person rather than merely a source of intelligence. The human studied him for a long moment, then smiled grimly. "You're different from the others. I don't know if that's better or worse. Fine, I'll tell you what little I know. But my message isn't strategy or tactics." The spy talked for hours, providing intelligence that was moderately useful. True to his word, Zathor ensured the death was merciful and arranged for the message to be sent through channels he was not supposed to know existed. The message was simple: "Tell my daughter I loved her. Tell her to live well." When Commander Vexral learned of the interrogation's success, he praised Zathor's cunning. When Emperor Drakmir heard of it, he nodded approval at his son's tactical thinking. Neither understood that Zathor felt no pride in the accomplishment, only a deep sadness that such bargains were necessary. 3 years passed, and Zathor transformed from a confused child into a young adult dragon, his scales now a deep, rich emerald that caught light like polished gems. His wingspan had grown impressive, his strength formidable even by dragon standards. He had completed advanced combat training, survived the brutal trials of fire and ice, and earned his place among the Empire's warrior elite. To outward appearances, he was everything a dragon prince should be: powerful, skilled, merciless when necessary. But inside, a quiet revolution had taken place. The stories Marcus told, the questions they raised, had fundamentally altered how Zathor saw the universe. He still trained with dedication, still performed his duties, but now he understood that strength could serve purposes beyond domination. Power was a tool, and tools could be used to build as well as destroy. The Empire, meanwhile, faced growing problems. The Coalition of Free Worlds, a loose alliance of species that refused dragon rule, had achieved several shocking victories. They employed guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run strategies that frustrated the dragon's preference for direct confrontation. Worse, some conquered species were beginning to rebel openly, inspired by the Coalition's resistance. Entire systems required increased military presence just to maintain control. Emperor Drakmir responded with characteristic brutality, ordering punitive strikes against rebel worlds. Entire cities were incinerated as warnings. Populations were enslaved en masse. Yet the resistance grew stronger, not weaker. It was a puzzle that troubled the Dragon High Command. How could increased violence fail to produce submission? Zathor saw what his father could not, or would not see. Every brutal retaliation created new rebels. Every atrocity gave the Coalition more propaganda, more recruits. The Empire was caught in a cycle where violence begot more violence, and their traditional solution of overwhelming force was actually strengthening their enemies. But suggesting such observations to his father would be viewed as defeatist thinking, possibly even treason. Instead, Zaethor volunteered for a frontline posting. I wish to prove myself in actual combat, father, to test my training against real enemies. The Emperor approved immediately, pleased that his son sought glory. Yes, you will command a strike force, raid coalition supply lines, bring me prisoners, and plunder. Show the universe what a dragon prince can do. Zaethor was assigned to the border regions where coalition activity was heaviest, given a cruiser and 200 dragon warriors of various ranks. It was a significant command for one so young, a sign of his father's confidence. Most of the warriors were veterans, scarred from countless battles, regarding their young commander with a mix of respect for his bloodline and skepticism about his actual capabilities. The night before departure, Zaethor spoke with Marcus in his chambers. The human had aged noticeably in the years since his capture, though he maintained the same quiet dignity. I'm leaving for the front, Zaethor said. You will remain here, maintained as royal property until my return. Will you return, Your Highness? Do you doubt my ability to survive? I doubt the ability of anyone to survive war indefinitely. But my question was not about capability, but about whether the dragon who returns will be the same one who leaves. Marcus met his gaze with the same frank honesty he had always shown. You stand at a threshold. On the battlefield, you will face choices that will define who you truly are. I know what I am. I am a weapon of the Empire. You are a person who has been trained as a weapon. There is a difference. Marcus packed a small bundle of items, medical supplies, ration bars, and several data tablets containing books. I took the liberty of preparing these. I know warriors are supposed to travel light, but perhaps between battles, you might find moments to think. Zaethor accepted the bundle, touched by the gesture despite himself. If I die, you will likely be reassigned to someone less tolerant. I'm sorry for that. If you die, Your Highness, I will mourn the loss of potential. You could be something remarkable, something your species has not seen before. A dragon who chooses wisdom alongside strength. That is a dangerous dream. Marcus, all worthwhile dreams are dangerous. The border regions of dragon space were harsh and contested. Multiple species fought here, each with their own grudges and goals. Zaethor's strike force operated from a mobile base, launching raids against coalition supply convoys and outposts. The missions were meant to be simple. Strike hard, take resources, withdraw before reinforcements arrived. The first few raids went exactly as planned. Zaethor proved himself a capable commander, adapting tactics to circumstances, minimizing his own casualties while maximizing enemy losses. His warriors began to respect him not just as royalty, but as a leader who valued their lives. Where other commanders treated soldiers as expendable resources, Zaethor planned carefully to preserve his forces. It was pragmatic, he told himself, not sentiment. Dead warriors could not fight future battles. But the fourth raid changed everything. Intelligence indicated a small coalition base on an agricultural moon, lightly defended, containing valuable medical supplies. Zaethor's force attacked at dawn, overwhelming the defenses in minutes. Standard procedure called for executing any survivors and burning the facility, but Zaethor ordered his warriors to secure prisoners instead. Among the captured was a human medical officer named Dr. Sarah Chun, a woman perhaps Marcus's age, with intelligent eyes and surprisingly steady hands despite facing dragon captors. When brought before Zaethor, she showed no fear, only professional assessment. You're younger than I expected, she said calmly. The intelligence briefings said the dragon prince was a savage. You don't look particularly savage. I have killed 17 sentient beings in the past month alone, Zaethor replied coldly. Do not mistake restraint for weakness. I don't. I'm simply making an observation. She glanced around at the other prisoners being held in the facility's courtyard. Are you planning to execute us? That depends. What value do you offer? I'm a trauma surgeon. I've saved hundreds of lives, both coalition and civilian. I suppose I could beg for mercy, but you strike me as someone who respects honesty more than pleading. Zaethor studied her, thinking of Marcus, of the strange human dignity that persisted even in captivity. You will provide medical treatment to my wounded warriors. In exchange, I will not execute you or the other medical personnel. And the soldiers? The support staff? They are prisoners of war. They will be treated according to military conventions. Dr. Chen laughed bitterly. Dragons have conventions now? That's new. Usually you just kill everyone and call it victory. One of Zathor's lieutenants, a scarred veteran named Korvax, stepped forward angrily. The human insults us, Commander. Let me burn her tongue from her mouth. No, Zathor's command was absolute. She speaks from experience of dragon actions. Her observation is factually accurate. We have not been known for mercy. He turned back to the doctor. I am attempting something different. Treat my wounded, and you live. Refuse, and I will burn this facility with you inside it. Choose. Dr. Chun chose to live and proved remarkably skilled. She worked on dragon physiology despite obvious revulsion, treating burns and lacerations with professional efficiency. She saved 3 warriors who would otherwise have died from complications. Zathor observed her work with fascination, seeing in her the same quality Marcus possessed, the ability to remain fundamentally human even in inhumane circumstances. During her work, Dr. Chun conversed quietly with Zathor when they were alone. You're not like other dragons I've encountered, she said while suturing a particularly nasty wound on a warrior's wing membrane. They enjoy causing pain. You seem almost reluctant to inflict it. Pain is a tool, not an entertainment. Most of your kind disagree. I've seen what dragons do to prisoners, to conquered populations. The torture, the casual cruelty. Her hands remained steady despite the emotion in her voice. Why are you different? I had a good teacher. Another dragon? A human. My servant, Marcus Webb. He taught me that strength and wisdom are not mutually exclusive. Dr. Chen's hands paused in their work. Marcus Webb? I knew a Marcus Webb before the war. He taught at the university on New Olympia. Is he alive? He was when I left. If he is the same man, he endures captivity with considerable grace. If you see him again, tell him Sarah Chun remembers him. Tell him some of his students still fight for what he taught us. She finished the suturing and moved to the next patient. You know this won't end well for any of us, right? Dragon or human, this war is consuming everything. Then, what would you have me do? I am one individual in an empire of billions. Be better. Make different choices. You have power, privilege, position. Use them to change things, even in small ways. She cleaned her instruments with practiced efficiency. My species has a saying. It is better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness. You could be that candle if you chose. The conversation haunted Zathor over the following weeks. His strike force continued operations, but he found himself making decisions that puzzled his warriors. He allowed non-combatant civilians to evacuate before attacks. He took prisoners rather than executing surrendered enemies. He forbade torture during interrogations, relying instead on bargaining and tactical psychology. Some warriors respected these choices as practical strategy. Others grumbled about weakness, about betraying dragon nature. Lieutenant Korvax became particularly vocal in his criticism, questioning orders, suggesting that the prince had been corrupted by too much exposure to inferior species. The confrontation came during a mission briefing. Intelligence had located a coalition ammunition depot on an asteroid base. Standard assault tactics would work, but civilian families lived in attached habitats, workers who maintained the facility. Zathor ordered the civilians be allowed to evacuate before the attack. Ridiculous, Korvax snarled. They will warn the garrison. Our surprise will be lost. Then we adapt our tactics. We are not butchers of children, Korvax. We are dragons. We are conquerors. This softness dishonors our ancestors. Our ancestors conquered through superior strength and strategy, not through murdering the helpless. Zathor's voice carried the snap of command. You will follow my orders or face court-martial. I challenge your authority. Korvax stood, his scales flaring with aggression. Trial by combat. If you are truly worthy to command, prove it. It was an ancient right, One Zathor could not refuse without losing all credibility. The two dragons faced each other in the ship's combat arena, watched by the entire crew. Korvax was larger, older, covered in battle scars. He came at Zathor with veteran's cunning, feinting high before striking low, using every trick learned in decades of war. But Zathor had been trained by the Empire's best, and more importantly, he had learned to think beyond pure aggression. He fought with controlled precision, wasting no energy, analyzing patterns in Korvax's attacks. When the opening came, he struck with decisive force, breaking the older dragon's wing and pinning him to the deck with talons at his throat. "Yield," Zathor commanded. "Kill me," Korvax gasped. "It is your right." I challenged and lost. I said yield. "I'm not interested in your death. I am interested in your obedience." The watching dragons muttered among themselves. Mercy shown to a challenger was unprecedented, possibly weak. But it was also undeniably impressive that their young commander had defeated a veteran so completely that he could afford mercy. Korvax yielded, confusion and grudging respect mixing in his expression. From that day forward, the crew followed Zathor's orders without question, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to change. They started taking prisoners without being ordered. They showed restraint in combat when possible. They began to see their enemies as opponents rather than mere targets. It was a subtle transformation, but real. Dr. Chun, still working as a prisoner medical officer, noticed the change. "You're teaching them something different," she said during one of their conversations. Whether they realize it or not, they're learning that there's more than one way to be strong. "They are learning tactics that improve our operational effectiveness," Zathor replied, but even he did not fully believe his own rationalization. "Keep telling yourself that, Commander. But I see what's happening. You're showing them that honor and strength aren't incompatible. That's dangerous knowledge for a dragon to possess." She was right, and Zathor knew it. Each small act of mercy, each decision to value life over expedience, was a tiny rebellion against everything the Empire represented. He was playing a dangerous game, one that could get him executed for treason if his father learned the full truth. But he could not stop. Having seen another way, having learned from Marcus that power could be exercised with wisdom, Zathor found himself unable to return to casual brutality. The question was not whether he would continue down this path, but how far he could go before the Empire decided he had gone too far. News of Zathor's unusual command style spread through military channels like ripples across still water. Some commanders dismissed it as youthful idealism that combat would eventually burn away. Others watched with interest, noting that his strike force maintained remarkably high operational success despite lower casualty rates among both his own troops and enemy combatants. A few senior dragons began requesting transfers to his command, intrigued by this new approach that seemed to blend efficiency with something unprecedented in dragon military doctrine. Emperor Drakmir heard the reports with mixed feelings. His son was achieving victories, which pleased him, but the methods troubled him. He dispatched General Kewayarmoth, his most trusted advisor, to observe Thor's operations personally and report back on whether the young prince had been compromised by excessive contact with lesser species. General Kewayarmoth arrived at Zathor's forward base unannounced, his massive battle-scarred form filling the command deck as he materialized from the transport vessel. "Prince Zathor," he rumbled in greeting, "your father sends his regards and his scrutiny." "General," Zathor bowed with proper respect, knowing this was a test. "You honor us with your presence. I trust you will find our operations satisfactory. I will find them whatever they prove to be." Kewayarmoth's ancient eyes studied the younger dragon with predatory intelligence. "I am here to observe, to evaluate, and to report truthfully to the Emperor. Show me what you have built here." Over the following week, Kewayarmoth observed everything: combat operations, prisoner treatment, crew morale, tactical decisions. He said little, his expression revealing nothing, but Zathor felt the weight of that legendary gaze, constantly assessing, judging, measuring. During one mission, coalition forces ambushed Zathor's patrol in an asteroid field. The fighting was fierce, close-quarters combat where both sides took heavy casualties. When dragon reinforcements arrived and turned the tide, several coalition fighters were trapped, wounded, unable to retreat. Standard procedure called for execution. "Take them prisoner," Thor commanded. "Medical teams forward to stabilize the wounded." Lieutenant Korvax, now one of Thor's most loyal officers, moved to obey without question. But General Kilwyarmoth stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold!" Every dragon froze. The general approached the wounded coalition fighters, studying them with clinical interest. "Prince Aethor, explain your reasoning." "Intelligence value, General. Live prisoners can be interrogated. Dead enemies tell us nothing." A pragmatic answer. Kilwyarmoth circled the wounded humans like a predator evaluating prey. "Yet your medical teams spend resources stabilizing them, resources that could be used for our own wounded. How do you justify this expenditure?" "Our wounded are already being treated, General. We have sufficient medical capacity for both." "Because you carry extra medical supplies specifically for this purpose." "It was not a question. I reviewed your supply requisitions. You stock twice the standard medical provisions of comparable strike forces." "Why?" This was the moment of truth. Aethor could offer another tactical rationalization, another strategic excuse. But something in General Kilwyarmoth's gaze suggested that the old warrior would see through comfortable lies. "Because unnecessary death serves no purpose, General. We can achieve our military objectives without maximizing casualties." "Cannot, or choose not to." "Choose not to. There is a difference between strength and cruelty. We are strong enough to show restraint." The words hung in the vacuum of space like a challenge. Several younger dragons exchanged nervous glances, certain their commander had just condemned himself. But General Kilwyarmoth merely grunted, a sound that might have been approval or condemnation. "Continue with prisoner processing. We will discuss this later." That evening, in Aethor's private quarters aboard the command ship, General Kilwyarmoth sat in contemplative silence for several minutes before speaking. "Your father fears you have been corrupted, that your human servant poisoned your mind with weakness." "Has he?" "I'm asking you, Prince. Have you been corrupted?" Aethor considered his answer carefully. Lying to Kilwyarmoth was pointless. The general had survived 3,000 years of political intrigue and would detect deception instantly. "I have been educated. Marcus taught me to ask questions our culture discourages, to consider perspectives beyond pure domination." "Is that corruption?" "That depends on whether you believe wisdom is weakness." "Wisdom?" Kilwyarmoth tasted the word as if it were foreign. "An interesting choice of term. Tell me, Prince, what wisdom have you gained that generations of dragon warriors somehow missed?" "That conquest is easy. Maintaining an empire is hard. We excel at destruction, General, but we have no talent for building anything lasting. Every species we conquer rebels eventually. Every system we control requires constant military presence. We rule through fear, but fear breeds resentment, and resentment breeds resistance." Thor met the general's gaze steadily. "Perhaps if we gave our subjects something beyond fear, they would have less reason to resist." "You speak of compassion, of mercy. These are not dragon virtues. Perhaps they should be, not as replacement for strength, but as complement to it. We are powerful enough to crush our enemies. But are we wise enough to create something that outlasts us?" General Kilwyarmoth rose from his seat, his massive form dominating the small quarters. For a terrible moment, Aethor thought the old warrior might strike him down for treason. Instead, Kilwyarmoth did something unexpected. He laughed, a deep rumbling sound like continental plates shifting. "You know what you remind me of, young prince? Your grandfather, Emperor Vaxthor the Wise. He was called before your father killed him in ritual combat and took the throne." Aethor stared in shock. This was family history never spoken of, a shameful secret buried in official records that portrayed the succession as orderly and natural. "Oh yes," Kilwyarmoth continued, settling back into his seat. "Few remember, and fewer speak of it. But I'm old enough to have served both emperors. Vaxthor believed, as you do, that empire required more than conquest. He attempted reforms, better treatment of conquered species, integration rather than subjugation, building infrastructure that benefited everyone rather than just exploiting resources. Your father opposed these reforms, called them weakness, and challenge for the throne. He won, reversed every policy, returned us to pure militarism. Then, I am doomed, Thor said quietly. If my grandfather failed with far more power and authority than I possess, what chance do I have? Vaxthor failed because he tried to change everything at once, imposed reforms from above without building support. He was murdered by his own son because he forgot that even an emperor must sometimes compromise with tradition. HFY Armath's ancient eyes fixed on Zathor with unsettling intensity. But perhaps a prince who learned subtlety from a human slave might be more successful. Perhaps change must come gradually, from warriors who learn through experience rather than through imperial decree. You are suggesting I continue on this path? You will not report me to my father as a traitor. I will report that you achieve military objectives through innovative tactics that preserve our strength while demoralizing enemies. That you have built an effective force through strategic thinking rather than pure aggression. Your father will hear what he wants to hear, that his son is a clever warrior. He need not know the deeper implications. HFY Armath stood to leave, then paused at the door. But understand this, Prince. I protect you now because I believe your grandfather's vision had merit, and because I am old enough to see the Empire's vulnerabilities that younger dragons deny. But if you ever truly threaten imperial stability, if your reforms endanger our species, I will kill you myself. Are we clear? Perfectly clear, General. Thank you for your honesty. After HFY Armath departed, Thor sat alone in his quarters, feeling the weight of revelation. He had an ally, powerful but conditional. He had permission to continue his experiments, but only so long as they appeared to serve traditional objectives. And he had learned that he was not the first to question dragon philosophy, merely the latest in a lineage of dreamers who imagined something better. The question now was what to do with this knowledge, this opportunity. How far could he push reform before conservative forces reacted? How many minds could he change before the Empire decided to change his? Dr. Chun, released from medical duties and preparing for prisoner exchange with coalition forces, offered her perspective during a final conversation. You're walking a knife edge, Commander. One slip, and you fall in a civil war or execution. What would you advise? Me? I'm just a prisoner who happens to be a surgeon. She smiled wryly. But if I were going to advise a dragon prince attempting to reform a 3,000-year-old empire, I would say this. Change hearts first, policy second. Your warriors follow you because you prove yourself in combat and treat them with respect. That's your foundation. Build on it slowly. Every soldier you influence goes home, eventually, carries new ideas with them. Cultural change happens gradually through thousands of small decisions, not through one grand gesture. That could take generations. Probably. But the alternative is trying to force change rapidly and getting yourself killed, which helps nobody. Play the long game, Commander. You're young. You have time. The prisoner exchange happened at a neutral station, coalition vessels on one side, dragon forces on the other. Dr. Chun and 30 other captured personnel were released in exchange for dragon prisoners held by the coalition. It was a minor diplomatic exchange, barely worth noting in official records, but it represented something unprecedented. Dragons acknowledging that prisoners could be valuable alive, that warfare had rules beyond simple annihilation. As Dr. Chin departed, she turned back once. Tell Marcus I remember. She called across the gulf between species. Tell him his teaching mattered. I will, Zathor promised, watching the shuttle carry her away to freedom. He wondered if they would face each other again on some future battlefield, allies or enemies in a war that seemed to have no end. The following months brought new challenges. Zathor's force executed increasingly complex operations, demonstrating that restraint did not mean weakness. They captured supply depots with minimal bloodshed. They destroyed military targets while evacuating civilians. They treated prisoners with sufficient dignity that some began providing intelligence voluntarily, horrified by the alternative treatment they had expected from dragons. Other commanders noticed. A few began requesting briefings on ZAE Thor's tactics. The most progressive adopted similar approaches in their own operations. Conservative commanders mocked these efforts as weakness, but results spoke louder than ideology. Forces using these methods achieved objectives with lower casualty rates and better intelligence gathering. But success brought visibility, and visibility brought danger. Hardline factions within the Dragon military viewed any deviation from traditional methods as betrayal of racial identity. Whispers circulated that the Emperor's son had been corrupted, that he sympathized with enemies, that he was unfit for command. These whispers reached Emperor Drakmir's ears, and even General Kiwaramath's protection could only deflect so much political pressure. The summons came without warning. Prince Ithor was ordered to return immediately to the capital fortress of Carthraxis for an imperial review. Such reviews could be routine assessments or thinly veiled tribunals. Given the political climate, Ithor suspected the latter. Lieutenant Korvax approached him privately before departure. "Commander, many of us would follow you regardless of what the Emperor decides. If you asked, we would stand with you." It was a declaration of loyalty that bordered on treason, offering armed support against imperial authority. Ithor felt both touched and horrified by the offer. "No, Korvax, if I have taught you anything, it should be that strength used wisely means avoiding violence when possible. I will face my father alone and argue my case. If he finds me wanting, I will accept his judgment. And if his judgment is death, then I will die knowing I tried to be more than a weapon. That is better than living as only a tool of destruction." The return flight to Carthraxis gave Ithor time to contemplate what he would say, how he would defend his actions without appearing weak or treasonous. He reviewed his operational records, prepared strategic arguments, planned diplomatic responses. But in quiet moments, he found himself thinking not of tactics, but of Marcus, of their conversations, of the patient human who had planted seeds of wisdom in hostile soil and somehow made them grow. Would Marcus be proud of what his student had become? Or disappointed that Ithor had not pushed far enough? Compromised too much with an empire built on oppression? There was no way to know, but Ithor hoped that his teacher would at least recognize that change, however slow, was still change. The fortress of Carthraxis loomed before Ithor exactly as he remembered it. Imposing, ancient, a monument to dragon power that had stood for millennia. Yet returning after years at the front, he saw it differently now. Where once he had seen only strength, he now saw rigidity. Where he had seen eternal permanence, he now saw stubborn refusal to adapt. The fortress had not changed. He had. Marcus waited in Ithor's old chambers, older now, his hair grayer, but his eyes still sharp with intelligence. When the prince entered, the human bowed formally, but his expression held something beyond mere servility, genuine concern mixed with pride. "Your Highness, welcome home." "Marcus." Ithor felt emotion catch in his throat, surprised by how much he had missed this quiet presence. "I am ordered to appear before my father tomorrow for imperial review. The political winds are not favorable. I have heard rumors. They say you have become soft, corrupted by excessive mercy." Marcus moved to prepare refreshments, his movements still precise despite his advancing age. "They also say your force achieves remarkable results and inspires unusual loyalty. Both things can be true simultaneously. Did you know about my grandfather? Emperor Vax Thor the Wise." Marcus paused, considering his response carefully. "I knew the official history portrayed his death as ritual combat. I suspected there might be more to the story." "Why do you ask?" Ithor explained what General Kiwaramath had told him about Vax Thor's reforms and their violent end. Marcus listened in silence, his expression thoughtful. "So you come from a lineage of reformers. That explains much about your nature. Some qualities pass through bloodlines, even when actively suppressed. My grandfather failed. He tried to change everything and was killed for it. What makes you think I can succeed where he could not? He tried to impose change from above, against the will of the culture. You are attempting something different, changing culture from within, warrior by warrior, decision by decision. It is slower, but potentially more lasting. Marcus handed Thor a glass of water, a simple gesture that somehow carried profound meaning. The question is not whether you can complete this transformation in your lifetime, but whether you can survive long enough to set it in motion. Tomorrow will determine that. My father will either accept my methods or condemn them. There is no middle ground with Emperor Drakmir. Then, you must frame your methods in terms he can accept, not as compassion, but as superior strategy, not as mercy, but as efficiency. Give him a narrative that preserves his worldview while introducing yours. Marcus met his gaze steadily. You have learned much about warfare and tactics. Now you must learn the most difficult lesson: how to speak truth to power without being destroyed by it. That night, Vathor barely slept, rehearsing arguments and anticipating counterattacks. When dawn came, he dressed in formal military regalia and made his way to the throne room where his father waited. The vast chamber was filled with dragon nobility, military commanders, and court officials, all gathered to witness the review. Some faces showed curiosity, others barely concealed hostility. General Kawaiarmoth stood near the throne, his expression neutral, offering no indication of support or opposition. Emperor Drakmir sat upon his throne of fused weapons, massive and terrible in his full ceremonial armor. His emerald scales had darkened to near black with age, and his eyes burned with the fire of countless battles. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. Prince Zaethor, you have been summoned to account for your command decisions. Reports indicate you employ tactics that deviate significantly from standard dragon military doctrine. Explain yourself. Zaethor bowed deeply, buying himself a moment to center his thoughts. Father, honored assembly, I stand before you having achieved a 93% mission success rate, with casualty rates 30% below average for comparable forces. My operations have secured strategic objectives, gathered valuable intelligence, and maintained operational readiness above standard benchmarks. Statistics, the Emperor growled. I want to understand your methods. You take prisoners rather than executing them. You show restraint in combat situations where maximum violence would be appropriate. You treat enemy wounded despite no tactical necessity. These actions suggest weakness, possibly even sympathy for our enemies. They suggest strategic thinking, Father. Zaethor kept his voice firm, confident. Dead enemies provide no intelligence. Executed prisoners cannot be exchanged for our own captured personnel. Indiscriminate violence creates martyrs and strengthens enemy resolve. I employ precision over brutality because it achieves superior long-term results. Commander Sarkith, one of the conservative hardliners, stepped forward with barely concealed contempt. You speak of long-term results while the coalition grows bolder. Your methods encourage them to resist, make them believe dragons can be negotiated with, manipulated through appeals to mercy. On the contrary, Aether replied calmly, my methods confuse and demoralize them. They expect mindless brutality and are unprepared for tactical sophistication. Prisoners I release carry back stories of honorable treatment, which creates division in coalition ranks between those who wish to continue fighting and those who question their propaganda about dragon savagery. It was a carefully crafted lie, or perhaps a truth viewed from a particularly strategic angle. In reality, Zaethor hoped his actions might plant seeds of eventual peace. But, framed as psychological warfare, his methods could be defended within dragon military philosophy. Emperor Drakmir leaned forward, his talons scraping against the throne's metal surface. You learned these tactics from your human slave. Is this true? I learned to think strategically from multiple sources, including human historical texts that Marcus provided. Ancient human strategists like Sun Tzu and Clausewitz wrote extensively about warfare that emphasized intelligence over brute force. I adapted their concepts to dragon capabilities. Zaethor met his father's gaze without flinching. If we are superior to all other species, should we not be capable of learning from their wisdom when it serves our purposes? It was a bold gambit, acknowledging human sources while reframing them as tools to be exploited rather than philosophies to be adopted. The assembly muttered among themselves, some nodding thoughtfully, others clearly unconvinced. General K.Y. Armoth chose this moment to speak. "If I may, Your Majesty, I spent considerable time observing Prince Hathor's operations. His tactical innovations show promise. While unconventional, his results are objectively superior to traditional approaches. I recommend cautious acceptance of these methods, with continued monitoring." The Emperor considered this, smoke curling from his nostrils as he thought. "You speak well, my son. Your arguments have tactical merit. But words mean nothing without commitment. I will test your resolve with action." He gestured to guards standing at the chamber's entrance. "Bring in the prisoner." Hathor felt cold dread as guards dragged in a human prisoner, beaten and chained. The man was perhaps 50 years old, defiant despite obvious torture, and he wore the insignia of a coalition admiral. This was no common soldier, but a high-ranking officer, someone with significant intelligence value. "This is Admiral James Harrison," Emperor Drakmir announced. He commanded the coalition forces at the Battle of Sigma Draconis, where 80 dragon warriors died. He refuses to provide intelligence despite extensive interrogation. Standard procedure calls for public execution as both punishment and warning. The Emperor's eyes fixed on Zaethor with predatory intensity. "But you advocate for restraint, for prisoner treatment that serves strategic purposes. Very well. I give you one solar cycle. Extract useful intelligence from this human using your methods. If you succeed, I will consider adopting your tactical approach fleet-wide. If you fail, you will personally execute him in the traditional manner, and you will return to standard doctrine. Do you accept these terms?" It was a trap perfectly designed to destroy him. If Zaethor succeeded through gentle methods, conservatives would claim the prisoner was weak. If he failed, he would be forced to personally betray his principles or face charges of cowardice. But refusing the challenge would be seen as weakness, ending his credibility permanently. "I accept," Zaethor said, because there was no other option. The admiral was transferred to secure quarters under Zaethor's supervision. The man sat in stoic silence, expecting torture or execution, prepared to die without revealing secrets. Instead, Zaethor dismissed the guards and entered alone, setting down a tray of food and water. "You are not what I expected," Admiral Harrison said finally, his voice hoarse from previous interrogations. "A dragon prince personally serving food to a prisoner. This must be some elaborate psychological torture." "No torture. Only conversation, if you are willing." Zaethor sat across from him, careful to keep his massive form non-threatening. "I am told you are a brilliant strategist, responsible for several coalition victories against superior forces. I am curious how you achieve this. You expect me to discuss tactical planning? What game is this?" "No game. I have one solar cycle to extract intelligence from you. Rather than causing pain, which your training allows you to resist, I thought we might have a professional discussion between military commanders." Zaethor pushed the food closer. "Eat. You will think more clearly with proper nutrition." Harrison studied him suspiciously but took the food, eating slowly. "You're the one everyone talks about. The dragon prince who shows mercy. Some in the coalition think you're playing an elaborate trick, building trust before springing a trap. Others think you might actually be different. I'm attempting to be different. Whether I succeed remains to be seen." Zaethor leaned back, tried to appear relaxed. "Tell me, Admiral, why do humans resist so fiercely despite facing overwhelming force? From a purely strategic standpoint, your resistance is illogical. Is it? Or is surrender to eternal slavery the illogical choice?" Harrison finished the food, some color returning to his face. "We fight because the alternative is extinction of everything that makes us human. Better to die free than live as property. My grandfather believed there could be alternatives between total domination and total freedom. A middle path where different species coexisted without either enslaving the other. Zaethor watched the Admiral's reaction carefully. He was killed by my father for these beliefs, but perhaps his vision was merely premature. Are you suggesting peace is possible between dragons and the Coalition? I am suggesting that perpetual war serves neither side's long-term interests. We're locked in a cycle of violence that consumes resources and lives on both sides. Eventually, one of us will fall, but at what cost? They talked for hours, not as interrogator and prisoner, but as two military professionals discussing strategy, philosophy, and the nature of conflict. Harrison was brilliant, his insights into asymmetric warfare valuable, and gradually he began sharing observations about coalition strategy, not from coercion, but from intellectual engagement with someone who listened rather than demanded. When guards came to check on the prisoner, they found the two in deep discussion about historical military campaigns, comparing human and dragon tactical doctrine. Word spread through the fortress. The prince was extracting intelligence through conversation rather than torture. Some mocked this as weakness. Others wondered if perhaps this approach might actually work. Marcus visited Zaethor late that night, bringing updates and refreshments. The court is divided. Conservative factions believe you are doomed to fail. Progressive elements are cautiously optimistic. Your father has made no public statement, but watches developments closely. Admiral Harrison is providing genuine intelligence, though not through coercion. He shares because he has come to believe that perhaps genuine dialogue might achieve what warfare cannot. Zaethor looked exhausted, the weight of political pressure combining with intense intellectual engagement. But I fear even success will not satisfy my father. He does not want efficient intelligence gathering. He wants submission, proof that force is always the answer. Then you must give him both. Intelligence he can use, presented in ways that satisfy his worldview. Marcus set down a data tablet containing transcripts of the conversations. I took the liberty of editing these, emphasizing tactical information while downplaying philosophical discussions. Show him results he can understand. The solar cycle ended. Admiral Harrison had provided extensive intelligence about coalition fleet movements, supply line vulnerabilities, and strategic planning. The information was genuine, valuable, and obtained without torture. When Zaethor presented his report to the assembled court, even conservative commanders acknowledged the quality of intelligence gathered. Emperor Drakmir listened to the report in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. You have demonstrated that alternative methods can produce results. This is noteworthy. However, intelligence alone does not prove your philosophy. Admiral Harrison will now be executed as originally planned, demonstrating that regardless of treatment, enemies of the Empire face ultimate punishment. Father, that would be strategically inadvisable, Zaethor said carefully. Admiral Harrison has agreed to continue providing intelligence about coalition operations. His cooperation could save countless dragon lives in future engagements. Executing him wastes this resource. You would keep this enemy alive indefinitely? Allow him to live while his forces kill our warriors. I would use every available tool to achieve victory, Father. If a weapon remains useful, only a fool destroys it prematurely. The Emperor rose from his throne, his full height towering over the assembly. Very well. Admiral Harrison lives, for now, providing continued intelligence. But understand this, my son. Mercy is acceptable only when it serves power. The moment your methods cease producing superior results, you will abandon them and return to traditional ways. Is this understood? Perfectly understood, Father. It was a Pyrrhic victory, preserving Harrison's life while acknowledging the fundamental primacy of power over principles. But it was also a crack in the imperial philosophy, an admission that alternatives to pure brutality could be tolerated if they proved effective. The following weeks brought subtle changes to dragon military doctrine. Commanders were given discretion to take prisoners when intelligence value justified the effort. Medical treatment of enemy wounded was permitted if it served tactical purposes. Civilian evacuation before military operations became officially optional rather than explicitly forbidden. These were small adjustments, carefully worded to avoid challenging core ideology, but they represented movement in directions previously inconceivable. Marcus observed these developments with quiet satisfaction. "You have begun something that cannot easily be stopped," he told Thor during one of their private conversations. "Ideas, once planted, grow in unexpected ways. Warriors who learn restraint will teach it to others. Commanders who achieve success through innovation will inspire imitators. Cultural change has its own momentum, but will be fast enough? The Empire's fundamental nature remains unchanged. We still conquer, still enslave, still see other species as inferior." Thor stared out at the fortress city below, millions of beings going about their lives in a system built on domination. "Perhaps I have only taught dragons to be more efficient oppressors. Or perhaps you have planted seeds that will grow into forests your children will walk through. Change measured in generations is still change." Marcus placed a weathered hand on the prince's scaled arm, a gesture of comfort that would have been unthinkable years ago. "You asked me once what my species has learned that yours has not. We learned that true strength includes the wisdom to know when not to use force. You are teaching dragons this same lesson. Whether they fully understand it, yet is less important than the fact that they are beginning to see alternatives." Admiral Harrison, maintained under comfortable house arrest, became an unexpected ally. He provided strategic consultation, helping dragon commanders understand coalition thinking without betraying specific operational details that would endanger his people. It was a delicate balance, serving his captors without fully becoming their tool. In conversations with Thor, he spoke of possibilities beyond the current war, of what peace might look like if both sides could find common ground. "You know this cannot last," Harrison said during one discussion. "Eventually, your father will die, and you will become emperor. Then, the true test comes. Will you maintain these reforms, expand them, possibly even attempt genuine peace? Or will the weight of tradition and the expectations of your people force you back into the role of conqueror?" "I do not know," Thor admitted. "I only know I must try. My grandfather failed because he moved too quickly without building sufficient support. I will move gradually, change minds one at a time, until reform becomes inevitable rather than revolutionary. A strategy that might take decades. Then it will take decades. Marcus taught me patience, among other things." Years passed. Thor continued his military service, rising in rank and influence. His methods, once controversial, became increasingly accepted as proof of their effectiveness accumulated. Young dragons trained under his philosophy, learning that tactical sophistication included knowing when restraints served better than violence. Some remained traditionalists, uncomfortable with these changes, but they could not deny the results. Emperor Drakmir, ancient and set in his ways, never fully embraced his son's approach, but tolerated it as long as victories continued. General Kilwarmoth, true to his word, provided political cover, defending Thor against conservative criticism while privately encouraging further reform. And in quiet chambers of the fortress, an aging human slave continued teaching a dragon prince lessons about wisdom, compassion, and the patient work of cultural transformation. Marcus had long since earned his freedom, offered multiple times by Thor, but he chose to stay. "My purpose is here," he explained. "Teaching you was the most important work of my life. Watching you teach others completes the circle." When Marcus died, peacefully in his sleep at an age respectable for humans, Thor mourned as dragons rarely did. Openly, genuinely, acknowledging the profound debt he owed this quiet revolutionary who had changed the course of an empire simply by answering a child's questions with honesty. At the funeral, attended by more dragons than anyone expected, Thor spoke words that would have been unthinkable a generation before. Marcus Webb was property by law, but a teacher by choice. He showed me that strength includes wisdom, that power without purpose is merely violence, and that even ancient empires can learn from those they conquer. He was a slave who helped free a prince from the prison of his own culture's limitations. For this, he will be remembered not as property, but as a person who changed the universe by changing one mind. Admiral Harrison, now a permanent resident of the fortress rather than a prisoner, spoke privately with Ethor after the ceremony. He would have been proud of you, of what you have become. I hope so, though the work is far from finished. Ethor looked out over the fortress city, seeing not a monument to conquest, but a work in progress, a culture slowly learning to value wisdom alongside strength. My father is old. When I become emperor, the true test begins. Can I maintain these reforms while managing conservative opposition? Can I move toward genuine peace without triggering civil war? Those are questions for the future. Today, honor your teacher by continuing his work. One decision at a time, one mind at a time, one small act of wisdom and restraint at a time. Harrison smiled slightly. Marcus once told me that the longest journeys begin with single steps. You have taken many steps already. Keep walking. The Dragon Empire would endure for centuries more, slowly transforming from within as generations of warriors trained in Zethor's methods rose to positions of influence. The war with the Coalition would eventually end not in glorious conquest or bitter defeat, but in negotiated peace that acknowledged the legitimacy of both sides. Former enemies would become cautious allies, then trading partners, then friends. And historians of many species would look back at this transformation, trying to pinpoint when it began. Some would cite specific battles or treaties. Others would point to economic factors or technological changes. But the wise ones, those who understood that culture shifts through countless small moments rather than grand dramatic gestures, would trace it back to a fortress chamber where a human slave answered a dragon child's questions with patience, honesty, and the revolutionary suggestion that strength and kindness were not opposites, but complements. Raised for war, the dragon prince learned kindness from his human servant. And in learning it, he taught an empire that true strength includes the wisdom to know when not to fight, the courage to show restraint, and the patience to build rather than merely destroy. It was not the ending anyone expected, but it was the one they needed, and that perhaps was the greatest victory of all.